Church family, welcome. My name is Ben, and I have the honor of serving as the lead pastor at Downtown Community Church. And we are here New Year's Day. Just want to say first and foremost, Happy New Year's. We love you. We miss you. We can't wait to be back together next week. But until then, we wanted to drop an episode. Actually, we were thinking and praying, saying, God, what is it that would be fun and refreshing and helpful specifically for this time? And what should we say? What content should we release? And Allie actually had the brilliant idea to drop an episode from the vault. Go and look through the years of podcasts, the years of sermons, and say, what is 1 week that we think would be timely for a specific time like this? And you're going to drop into an episode today, or a sermon series today, where we were discussing the intersection of mental and emotional health. It was from 2019, and I believe it was the first time we really, as a church, ever began to enter into this discussion. Now, it's something that's fairly regular in the rhythm of our current life and our current things that we talk about in church, but we were talking about it, and this is the week 5 of that, and it's talking about rest. It's talking about Sabbath. Now, Dylan talked about that a few weeks ago, but I wanted to put this in front of you because right now, most of us are in a rhythm in life where we're taking a break, where we're taking a pause, where things have, because of the holidays, become a little bit disruptive, and we're looking and planning for the next year. And as we're planning to rest is one of the most important ways to ensure that we actually get that. But this episode talks about a lot more than that. It talks about the why, it talks about the what, it talks about some of the how, and specifically where we get this even idea from Sabbath and rest from. So I hope this blesses you. I hope you have an amazing, amazing day. Great start of the new year. We love you. We know that you love Jesus, and we're going to glorify him in some extraordinary ways this year together. So here's the episode. Hey, we are in part of a series called Change My Mind. The idea behind this is it talks about the intersection between emotional, mental, and spiritual health. It's a place that the church has a lot of times vacated, and there's been a long kind of history of mental health in church and how those things kind of influence one another, or sometimes are opposed to one another, and I think aren't opposed to one another. But if you're dropping in, this is the final part of a 5-part series, so I would encourage you to go back and listen to parts 1 through 4. You can podcast any of the stuff that we talk about, search DCC Tally or Downtown Community Church at any of your podcasting sources, because we all know we live in a podcast generation. So feel free to go back and listen to that. But the summary of the arc of this entire series has been, for the first 3 weeks, you could summarize, and you've got to go back to go forward. You've got to go back to go forward. In other words, in order to get to a positive place in terms of mental and spiritual and emotional health, we have to revisit the past. We have to dig up some things that are sometimes difficult. We have to dig up some things that sometimes we don't know that are there. We have to kind of do if this was a car, we have to start to pull out some dents. And for some of us, that was a good and a helpful 2 or 3 weeks. And for some of us, that's not a 2 or 3 weeks. That's a 2 or 3 year process. And that is okay, just as long as we're continuing to move forward. But last week and this week, you could summarize in this, it's that if we were a car, and that was pulling out the dents and the dings, in every car it takes maintenance. In every car, it takes some type of attention, some type of upkeep. And so these are habits and practices that really the scriptures talk about, but kind of modern science talks about as well, as being really healthy and positive habits that build into the everyday rhythm of our life good spiritual practices. And last week we talked about the idea of prayer, and not just prayer to say, hey God, this is all the stuff that I need. Hey God, these are the things that I'm thinking about. Hey God, these are the things that I'm worrying about. It's let's just take a minute every single day. Let's just take a minute every single day and pause. Be totally silent and acknowledge that we are constantly in the presence of God. In fact, God is constantly living and moving inside of us who have put our faith, our hope, and our trust in Jesus through the Holy Spirit. And so let's just take a second and just not say, God, here's my agenda, but similar to how someone that you care about, similar to someone that you love, similar to someone that you have devoted your life to, if you're a husband, or if you're a wife and you're married, or maybe you're a boyfriend or girlfriend, fiance, and you just really like this person, at sometimes it's just nice to be in their presence with no agenda. And so let's just take a minute and be quiet before God. And then let's spend about a minute saying, God, here's the things that I need in my life. But God, I'm not just telling you, here's my list of worries. God, I know that I am dependent on you. In fact, the way that Jesus would talk about this would be, give us this day our daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. God, these are the things that I am dependent on you daily for. And oh, by the way, let me do this all with thanksgiving. Let me just spend a minute saying, God, here are all the things that I'm thankful for. Here are all the ways that I have seen you work, God. I have so many things to be thankful for. So let me just spend some time acknowledging the fact that just simply the fact that I can talk to you, I should be thankful for. So today, I think it's going to be really fun. Because today we're talking about a subject that few of us have ever heard a sermon on, probably. Today we're going to talk about a subject that we all know about, but I don't think anybody's ever felt convicted about. And I don't want to say anybody ever, so that's kind of like an overstatement. So I'm going to say very few of us have ever felt convicted about. In other words, from time to time, somebody will call me up and say, hey, I really need to talk. I got some stuff going on in my life, and I really just want to, hash a couple things out. And oftentimes it's here's this problem I've got. Here's this cyclical pattern of sin I find myself in. I'm not really sure how to do it, not really sure how to break out of it. And so can you help me? Can you kind of give me some words of advice or some wisdom? I feel this deep conviction about it. And what's interesting is it's in the 10 Commandments, and it's one of the most basic commandments. In fact, I think it's the easiest commandment to follow, but what we're going to find out is the reason that we don't follow this commandment is the exact reason that the commandment was actually given. And here's probably how you've heard this word, and I just want to be real clear because, again, we very rarely feel that. It's Sabbath. Sabbath. I don't know who's ever has like come to me and said, Ben, I need to have some coffee with you. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? Man, I'm just not keeping the Sabbath holy. And I feel this deep conviction. I feel this weight. In fact, what's interesting is this is the fourth commandment of the 10 commandments, and this is the longest in terms of words of all the commandments. But for some reason, every other commandment we think, totally get it, totally understand, don't have any God before me, totally get it, don't take my name in vain, which isn't just like don't say a cuss word. It's don't attach my name to anything that my name shouldn't be attached to. So if don't say that God said to break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Maybe you just didn't like them that much, but different sermon for a different day. But in verse 4, he spends the most time out of all the 10 commandments saying this, Sabbath. Sabbath. In fact, I want to read this commandment to you if you never heard it before. So, and if you haven't, then you can always go to a Chick-fil-A, by the way, because they've got all 10 of them posted. So, chapter 20 of the book of Exodus. Now, in case anybody ever asked you where the 10 commandments are, it's in Exodus chapter 20. So this is what it says. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And I feel like at this point, by the way, if you're not familiar with what happened with the 10 Commandments, Moses was on this mountaintop. The nation of Israel had been in Egyptian slavery for a long, long, long time. In fact, for a few hundred years, they had been in Egyptian slavery. And part of Egyptian slavery was there was no rest. They were brick makers, basically, and they would make these bricks to build, whatever Pharaoh's latest building project was. And so for hundreds of years, they didn't have what we have, which is like, okay, I'm going to work 5 days. I'm going to take a couple days off. I'm going to work 5 days and take a couple days off. They worked 7 days a week. In fact, the Egyptian work week was a 10-week work week, 10-day work week. And they would work every single day. So imagine for hundreds of years, like some of us, it's been like 14 days since I had a day off. They're like, it's been 300 years since I've had a day off. And so God kind of needs to qualify what this looks like. Because I think for many of them, they didn't have a frame of reference for what that meant. So he says, 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And on it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant, or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. Now, here's what's funny about this, is we read that and we're like, God, why would you specify, not even the livestock? Like who can control an animal that an animal doesn't work, right? That's just like a little bit overboard. Like you need to just kind of pare it down. We get it, don't work. But isn't it interesting? That of all the commandments we would agree with, This is the one that we should agree with the most, but we have the most difficult time acknowledging that we should do it. Like it's like do not kill. It's like, okay, yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. Don't commit adultery. Okay, generally speaking, good idea. In fact, not just generally speaking, good idea. You don't bear false witness, don't be jealous and don't be envious of your neighbor's, wife or your neighbor's kids or your neighbor's, car or your neighbor's brand new or brand old 76 Bronco, Don't be jealous of that. And we would all say, yeah, totally agree. Then God says, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a day off. We'd say, God, I am busy. Like, I got a lot of stuff to do. I got a lot of stuff happening in life. And what's interesting is so did they. So did they. The reason he said this was not because he was just trying to be overly critical and just overly, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, here are all the rules. Here's what he knew. Eventually, as the nation of Israel would wander through the desert, eventually they would land in a place, they would land in what was to them the promised land, and they would read this and they would say, so we can't do any work, but the foreigners or the sojourners in our midst, they're not us, they're not the nation of Israel, so they can do work. We can put them on our animals and they can do work, so we can still be productive even though we're not doing anything. In fact, it's funny, if you read kind of how the New Testament or the Old Testament lays out what happened when they went in the promised land, almost immediately after they had gates, he says, even the sojourners within your gates. So they would send sojourners outside of the gates. I'm like, one, that is innovative, so I appreciate you for that. But what's interesting, he says, I don't want anybody to do anything, and I don't want you to look for all these loopholes to do it. He says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them. And he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now when it comes to Sabbath, it's an interesting word. It's an interesting thought because, again, we've probably all heard of that. We've probably all, are familiar with the idea. But there's a little bit of ambiguity about what it means. The Bible doesn't describe exactly what work is. It just says don't do it. So I came up with for us kind of a working definition of if you take all the different parts and the pieces and kind of the cultural context for what the Sabbath is for us. And so I want to give you just a brief definition of what the Sabbath is. This is like as if he said, thou shalt take a day off from productivity and work. Thou shalt take a day off from productivity and work. And I just put thou shalt because shout out to the King James Version, okay? So thou shalt take a day off from productivity and work and working to relax, rest, and enjoy God. Now, don't you like a God who says, hey, take a day off? I don't want you to work. I don't want you to be productive. I just want you to relax. Now, what's interesting about this, again, is the nation of Israel had just come out of slavery. And when the first time that we read this is not in Exodus chapter 20, it's actually in Exodus chapter 16, where they've walked out of the desert, and at this point the nation of Israel is somewhere between 1 million and 2 million people. And as you can imagine, they've just been delivered from Egyptian slavery. They're walking into the desert, and as they're walking into the desert, they've got a ton of food. They've got everything that they could probably carry with them. They're walking. Well, eventually they run out of food, and you've got 1 million people to feed. And so they said, well, what are we going to do? We're just going to die out here. We should have just stayed in Egypt. God says, I'm going to provide some stuff for you. It's going to be called manna. It's going to be your daily bread. And you're going to wake up in the morning and you're going to go outside and there's going to be this dew-like substance and you're going to go and you're going to pick it up and it's actually going to be this bread-like substance. And then I want you to take it and I want you to eat it. By the way, I would have loved to see the first person who ate the manna, right? Like who is that? Like this weird dude named Frank, probably. This weird guy named Bob who like walked up and he's like, oh, dude, I'm trying some of that. It's like, y'all got to eat some of this. This stuff is fantastic. And so he says, you're going to go and you're going to take it and you're going to eat it. But here's what I want you to do. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take one little kind of cistern full, and I want you to fill it up every day, and that's going to be enough for you, and I want every person to do that, and I want you to fill it up once a day. But here's what I want you to know. If you take more than what you need for today, then you are going to, if you try to store it, you can try to keep it, then on that day when you're going to wake up the next morning, you're going to have your stored stuff, there's going to be all kinds of worms, there's going to be all kinds of deterioration, it's going to smell, it's going to be awful. Do not take more than what you need, but on the sixth day, take 2 of them, and they're going to be preserved for the day and for tomorrow. Because when you come out on Sunday, there will not be any, because I just want you to relax. So in Exodus 16, they actually recount what happened the first Sabbath. We'll start at verse 20. But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms, and it stunk. And Moses was angry with them, and morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. And on the 6th day, when they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each, and that's kind of their container. And when all the leaders in the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath." By the way, Sabbath, if you ever studied the Hebrew kind of language, Sabbath comes from a word, Sabbat, and our Sabbath is the word Sabbat. And in the Hebrew language, they got their nouns from their verbs, which is linguistically interesting, but they got their nouns from their verbs, and Sabbat came from the verb savat, and savat meant to cease. In other words, it's like God saying, hey, I want you to have a day, I'm not going to really clearly define this, I just want you to have a day of ceasing and resting. Ceasing and resting. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest and a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning. So they laid it aside till the morning as Moses commanded them. And it did not stink. There were no worms in it. And Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none." Now, at this point, you get the point. At this point, you get the point. God said, I've got 10 commandments. I've got my top 10 list of things that I want you to do. And the first 3 have to do with my relationship with you. And the last 6 have to do with your relationship with, each other. Don't kill, don't, steal, don't lie. But I'm going to have one in there, and it's going to be the longest one that's just going to be for you. And here's what we would learn would be the point of that between Exodus 16 and Exodus 20. It was real simple. Here was the idea that they put behind. They were to cease and trust that God would provide. They were to cease and trust that God would provide. They were to cease, they were to stop. And in their stopping, they were to trust that God will provide. And God said, and I want you to build this into the daily rhythm of your life. Here's where we come into the existence of this. For us, we have 5 days that we work, for many of us, and we have 2 days that we work at home. We have 5 days that we work, that we do everything that, it's 8 to 5, it's 9 to 6, it's 9 to 6. It's for some of you, it's, you're the 8:15 service, right? It's like 7 a.m. to like 10 p.m. because you're out there grinding, getting it, hustling, right? And so you're just like going. And he says, hey, I want you to do this, I want you to do this. When you go home, I don't want you to every single week just sit there and go home and now we've got this and this and this and this and this and this and this to do. I just want you to stop, which all of our reaction will be, well, if I stop, I won't have enough time. If I stop, there are so many things that need to get done. There are so many things that need to happen. I can't stop, because if I don't stop, then it won't happen. To perhaps which God would say back, maybe that's the point. I want you to cease. Oh, back 1 second. And trust that God will provide. I want you to stop, and I want you to trust. And I know you're busy. I know you have a lot of stuff to do. But in context, this makes so much sense. Because the entire nation of Israel, if they did not work every day, they would not eat every day. They didn't have what we have. They didn't have bank accounts where they could just store up manna for years and years to come. They didn't have compounding interest in interesting, investment portfolios where it could, am I going to go in a conservative or am I going to be aggressive? Am I going to be entrepreneurial? Like, they didn't have those things. It was every single day. And imagine this. You come from a place where for 300 years, like your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, your great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, everybody has worked every single day of their life. And God says, I just want you to stop. And I want you to trust that if you stop, I will provide. We started doing this in our family, and we're honestly not perfect at it. We kind of go back and forth in what this looks like, and we've kind of have a couple of variations of Sabbath. But here's two of the biggest takeaways for me. Here's the two biggest takeaways, I think, for us, and that we would all probably experience if we were to do this. Number one is this. My worth doesn't come from my work. My worth doesn't come from my work. Isn't this true? We feel a sense of worth because of what we do or how much of it we do. For them, they, again, made for hundreds of years bricks in Egypt. And I want you to imagine that all of a sudden you walk out into the desert and you've got nothing to do. It's like for you, if you've just been like 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 5 every single day your entire life, and all of a sudden you walk out into the woods, like you walk into Ocklackney River State Park, right? And you just walk in there, or you walk anywhere in Wakulla, which is kind of a weird place, or you just walk into the woods, the swamp, the something, there's nobody around, there's nothing around, and all of a sudden, right, there's almost this existential crisis that was happening because for so long, our worth has been attached to our work, and so it's almost like God saying, I want you to stop, and I want you to remember me, and I want you to know that your worth comes from being with me, not from what you do. Even if what you do is doing things for me. I'll tell you the most difficult people to do this is people in ministry. I heard this, saw this quote that said if a pastor was to not do any of the other 9 commandments on a regular basis, they'd probably get fired. But if they were to ignore the Sabbath on a regular basis, they'd probably get a raise. That's where we live. Here's the second one. My worth doesn't come from my wealth. My worth doesn't come from my wealth. We feel a sense of worth for the people who have wealth. The more you have and however you want to define wealth, you can define wealth as money, you can define wealth as having stuff, having clothes, having cars, having houses, but we feel a sense of worth from wealth. This is why people who make absurd amounts of money, everybody think is really funny when you're in their presence. It's like, oh, Bill, that's so funny. It's like, that wasn't funny at all, by the way. If you ever have to say, oh, that's funny, that wasn't funny, because if it was funny, you would have laughed. You wouldn't have to tell him that. It's a side note. But, right, here's what happens. Our worth doesn't come from our wealth, from our ability to produce and to provide. And so I also wanted to be clear about this, because when it comes to Sabbath, a lot of us would hear this and say, okay, but life could get absurdly busy. Like, I'm not talking about the regular, I kind of get this in the day-to-day, in the piece-to-piece, in the minutia of life. What about when it's busy? I'm talking about the holidays are coming. I've got midterms coming. I've got exams coming. I've got a project for work coming. And I just have to be in grind mode. I want to read to you what God said to the nation in a very similar context in Exodus chapter 34, verse 21. He's kind of this renewal of this covenant between God and his people. And he wanted to clarify a couple things. Chapter 34, verse 21, this is what he said. 6 days you shall work, but on the 7th day you shall rest. He says, 6 days you shall work, but on the 7th day you shall rest. In the plowing time and in harvest, you shall rest. Now, if you were a farmer, which very few of us are, you'd have known that these are the two peak times of the year. These are the times when they are just absurdly busy. They have 100 things, perhaps 1,000,000 things going on. And so this is kind of how I would say this for us, and because I know we all get really busy. So this is kind of the point of that verse is this. They were to cease and trust God even when they were really busy. And I know that your context, you'd be like, well, hold on, Ben, you don't understand my work. I'm not just really busy, like I'm crazy busy. So here's for all of you, because again, 815 type A people, I get you, I understand how you are. So I just want to emphasize this point. You were to cease and trust God even when they were really, really busy. Now, isn't this weird? Let's just pause for a moment. For a lot of us, I understand it because I feel the same way. There's something inside that just kind of wants to push back against this idea. Isn't it interesting? Well, I'd say this, for half of us, we hear this and we're like, dude, you don't have to tell me. Like, you're kind of the other person where it's like, okay, but you should work the other 6 days. You should actually be productive, get off the couch, we get it, But isn't this weird? If you push back against this, what is that? What is that? What is that inside of you that I have to convince you to not work for a day? My guess is if we were to take it back, there's something inside of you, there's something inside of me that drives us to the point where we feel like we have to work. And here's why this is so important as it relates to mental health. Let me be clear about this. For you and for me, it is very difficult to be emotionally and mentally healthy if we never stop and rest. If we never stop and just remember God, if we never stop and just process, if we never just stop and spend some time and spend a day just enjoying God, enjoying life, enjoying what He's given us, if we never just stop and we're always going, it's always on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. You know what happens? We never actually get to process what's happening in life. You were made, I was made, we were made to live in this rhythm. It's like at some point if you work out, you need to stop and take a rest day, right? Because your body needs to recover. Mentally, at some point, we need to stop and remember God so that our minds can recover. Now, I want to kind of for the last 2 or 3 minutes be super practical. Because at this point, I'm trying to make a convincing case that you should take a day off. But the problem is, again, they're not wildly specific about what is work. There's not a lot of specificity about what you can and can't do. And throughout the years as the nation of Israel would go along, they would be increasingly specific about all the things that you could and could not do. And to keep the Sabbath holy, you basically couldn't do anything. And what's interesting is Jesus then came along. And if you watch what Jesus did, disproportionately, He did more miracles on the Sabbath than any other day. In fact, keep the Sabbath holy. That is the only commandment of all of the 10 commandments that's not mentioned in the New Testament in its Old Testament form. I think that's why we have such a difficult time with it, because Jesus didn't say it, so we don't think it applies. And in fact, Paul would go on to say this. He would say, in the past, it was as if one day was holy than the others, but all days are holy, and they're all holy unto God. God is in them, God is through them, God is all of them. And so there is not one day that is not holier or more holy. And so for us, this doesn't mean it has to be Sunday. This doesn't mean it has to be a Saturday. This doesn't even mean it has to be the same day every single week, although for me, if it's not, it's difficult to have a rhythm of it. But here's the point. Every single week, pick a day and take it off. And at some point, there's going to be a question of what can I do, what can't I do, what can I do, what can't I do. What's fascinating is if you ever read, and in fact, I would say go home and do your own study on this about Jesus and His miracles on the Sabbath. Here's what you find is almost every single time He did something on the Sabbath, it was to set someone free from something. I think God's institution of the Sabbath was to trust Him, that we would realize that our worth is not in our work, our worth is not in our wealth, our work is in Him. And so I think the Sabbath is a day for us to just cease, it's to stop, and it's for us to just be free. I think the moment we put these strict limitations on it, outside of just making sure I don't jump back into work mode, I think that's the day that we begin to fall back into the tendencies that Jesus pushed against. And so it's simply a day to stop. People want to say, well, does that mean I can't do yard work? Well, I don't know. Some of you guys, you love yard work. You're weird, but you love yard work, Like, man, you just get in there and you like getting them weeds out and you're just like, oh yeah, this is my stuff, Does that mean I can't like do some like, I don't know, I'm a woodworker, carpentry, I'm a dude, Okay, so we get it, and you're just, this is my thing. It's like, no, man, if that gives you life, if that brings you joy, if that gives you freedom, then do it. Well, does that mean I can't shop at Publix? Well, maybe for you if you like hate that, but for somebody like me, like, man, I love putting little kids in the cart and I love letting them just run around and I love, saying like, Ava, she's like, beelining down the thing. Like, I just enjoy some of that stuff. It's so subjective because it's so different for everybody because everyone has different thoughts, tendencies, and preferences. I'll tell you this though, if you're a parent and you have small kids, this is going to be tough, but I think you should do it and you should just try to figure out ways of what that looks like for you. If you are if you're not a single mom, if you are a stay-at-home mom, then you can't not do this because it's not just like, okay, kids, good luck. You're 2 years old, but, eat some Cheerios. Let me know. But isn't it true? We have such a difficult time with this. What is that inside of us? You know what's funny? As we would start to think, man, I can't do that. That would have to do so many other things in order to prepare for that. I bet next time you read about the Sabbath in the scriptures and you read about the day of preparation, that will all of a sudden make sense. Because what they knew is if I'm going to take a day off, I've got to prepare. And you read over and over through the scriptures, the day of preparation, which was the day before the Sabbath, because they knew I need to plan for this. I need to think about this. For me, it's about sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. Sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. Doesn't matter what's going on in life. I try to do everything I can to keep that time holy. If I'm sitting there and I've still got some sermon thoughts circulating and there's some things going on, I just sit there and say, okay, God, I know Sunday's coming, right? Because every Sunday I basically have a term paper and an oral presentation, right? I've got a term paper. I just got to say, here are my findings. Here are what I studied. Here's what I learned. Here, you're all good. You're all smart. You're all educated people. Here's what I go. And sometimes there's still, thoughts, and I've studied all this stuff, and I'm still waiting for it to come together. And I say, okay, God, for the next 24 hours, I'm not going to think about it. I'm going to stop and trust. I'm going to stop and trust. And here's what I bet we all find, is that if we did that, I bet our marriages would be better. I bet our parenting would be better. I bet, in fact, our emotional and mental health would be better because for the first time in a long time, we just stopped. When we do this right, which we don't always do, it's for us to stop and do nothing that makes money. This is just kind of our family's version of this. Do nothing that makes money and do nothing that feels like work. Do nothing that makes money, do nothing that feels like work. My wife, Lindsay, stole a phrase that says it's called Sabbath, not slobbeth, okay? You're welcome to take that. But here's what I want to challenge you. So I know you're pushing back against this, and I know this can be difficult, which is interesting. Do it for 1 month. Do it for the next 4 weeks. Just do it for the next month. Don't commit to it for the rest of your life, and I get it, you want to, and all that stuff. Just do it for the next 4 weeks. Have a conversation if you've got a bunch of stuff going on in life to say, what would I need to do this? What would we need to prepare? What would we need to do differently? What would we need to shift in our schedule? Because again, we would feel wildly disobedient if we murdered or if we committed adultery, right? Nobody would walk in here being like, oh man, you gotta convince me like it's a bad thing to murder people. But God said, hey, keep the Sabbath holy. So I just want to challenge you. For 1 month, you have a God who so loved you, who so knew you and who so knows you that he sent his son to die for you and for me. And he said, and with that, take a day off. So here's what I want to do to end this service together, our last and final week. I want to do the same thing that we did last week. Because I think we can't just move on from it. I think we just need to spend a minute being silent, acknowledging the presence of God. I think we need to spend a minute telling God, God, these are the things that I'm going on. And perhaps for you this morning, the thing that you're thinking about and praying about all the time is, God, I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can. God, I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can. And perhaps for you, the prayer is, so God, show me how I can make the space and the time and the availability in my life. But let me tell you this, if you will incorporate the daily pause to acknowledge God, to spend time declaring your dependence, and these are the things that I need from God, and if you will at the same time declare your thankfulness, in every single week you will take a day off, we will put ourselves as a church in a posture to be emotionally and spiritually healthy people, because we all know at this point you cannot be spiritually mature without being emotionally mature. Let's spend some time in silence together. Jesus, I thank you for all that you're doing in us and through us. But God, for a minute, we just want to spend some time in your presence, simply acknowledging that you are here. And God, we want to spend a minute just telling you these are the things that are going on in our life. These are the things that we need help with, the complications, the issues, the problems. For some of us, it's, God, help us to see clearly what a Sabbath day rest would look like in our lives. And God, for this last minute together, to end this series, we just want to declare all of the things that we are thankful for. God, you have given us so much. And if you have not done anything else, if we can't see you work in any other way, we know that you have given us your son, Jesus, to make us right with you. And God, I pray that you would use this in our lives that every single one of us would go home. And for the next month, put it on the calendar, circle it, move things aside, that we would have a 1 day a week personal, familial vacation. That we would rest. We would be rest from the drive to produce, the drive to find our worth through our work and through our wealth, that we would simply stop, we would cease, and we will trust you, knowing that you will provide. And if ever we doubt that, perhaps this is the perfect opportunity to trust. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, I hope that was a blessing for you. And I just want to reiterate, this is tough. I'm convicted at how much I needed to hear that, even though I gave that sermon, because it's so easy to not pause, to not cease, to not rest, to not enjoy the presence of God in our lives, and just spend a day reflecting not on productivity, not on what we can do, what we can earn, what we can make, or what needs to get done, but just the goodness of God in our life. Now, we cannot wait to get back together next week, but for now, I just want to leave you with that. Leave you with the challenge. For the next month, I want you to take a day every week in Sabbath. Start off 2023 in the right rhythms and the right postures, and let's set ourselves up in a way that we are following Jesus with all of our head, with all of our heart, but at the same time pausing and just spending time with him. Hey, we love you. Can't wait to see you next Sunday.